Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Rocky Top Insider Press Pass podcast here on this Thursday, September 12th edition, coming at you a little later in the week here on a Thursday, talking Tennessee football. Of course, we are through 2 weeks of the season. Tennessee is 2-0 and look pretty convincing so far this season, coming off of a 51-10 win over NC State in Charlotte, an absolute beatdown of the Wolfpack. We're going to talk a little bit about that game, but focus more on some big picture talk today, talking about how Tennessee maybe compares to some of the other SEC teams at the top of the conference we've seen so far through 2 weeks, and just what we think about this Tennessee team overall through 2 weeks. But I got my guys Ryan Shumpert and Rick Butler with me today, as always. Rick, I'll start with you. How you doing?
Doing pretty good, Jack. Good to see you again. Good to see Ryan as well after our trip to Charlotte over the weekend. Things have been pretty good here. I will admit, things have been a bit of a trying week at times. I had a battle with the stairwell in the G10 parking garage.
Oh, no.
I was not successful in my battle.
What happened?
There's not much to tell here. I was coming home from the press conferences on Tuesday afternoon, and I was parked all the way in the G10 parking lot. And it's a stairwell. It goes down. There's some narrow stairs, and I don't know what happened. It was just one of those things where I just kind of lost my balance going down the stairs. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're like, wow, Rick completely wiped out in the stairwell. No. I caught myself. It was one of those things where I tried to text this to Ryan yesterday. I don't know if it made sense, but
no, it did make sense. It was hilarious.
You're falling down the stairs, right? And when that happens, you kind of go in slow motion. Your only goal is to get to the bottom where there's just a lot of flat ground. So you might have to skip some steps on the way down. So as I'm starting to fall, I'm realizing I can kind of maybe Euro step my way out of this. So I throw my body weight over to the left. I land a couple stairs down on my left foot. And now I'm thinking, I got to make it down to the end. That's my only hope left, or else I actually will fall head over heels, and it'll be a mess. Make one big jump for the very bottom. I stuck the landing. I didn't fall. Unfortunately, my foot was completely turned sideways. I let out a big cuss word in the stairwell. Nobody was around to see it. I crawled to my truck afterwards. I was in excruciating pain. I didn't break my foot. I thought I might have. I just have a nasty little sprain. So I've been hobbling my way around my apartment complex, hobbling my way into the Kroger the other day. It's been a really uneventful week, genuinely, except for my battle with the G10 stairwell.
So are you questionable for Saturday? Have you been downgraded to doubtful? What's your status right now, Rick?
I probably graded myself an out on the day up. I was like, I might never walk again. This is gonna mess up my Norman trip. This is gonna mess up the Fayetteville trip. I was like, this could mess up March Madness.
You're an IR candidate right now. That's what I'm hearing.
Now, fortunately, I had a speedy recovery. I'm back moving.
I'm ready. Okay, what a turnaround. All right, sounds good.
I will be there against Kent State. I will give my all. For Rocky Top Insider. Genuinely though, I think I dodged a bullet. I think it was one of those moments where I very easily could have come away with either a broken foot or a high ankle sprain. It's not even sprained that badly. I've been able to walk, 48 hours later, pretty fine. So I think I dodged a bullet. It could have been a bad one, but I was sitting there. I was like, man, if I have to, first up, I was like, I don't know how I'm going to get to this Kent State game, but if I gotta get one of these scooters, I can't be in a press box in a scooter like that. That's too much. So I did have some fear of what was I going to do if I lost mobility, but fortunately, no rehab for me. Good to go.
I think the single best thing that could have happened from a content standpoint for us is if you had a high ankle sprain and obviously we're not rooting for injury, but some important Tennessee player got a high ankle sprain this weekend and Rick had to get to tightrope surgery, and we could do side-by-side comparison of Rick Butler versus Tennessee football player trying to recover from a high ankle sprain at the same time.
It would
see
look
how
like,
much faster the SEC athlete with all of Tennessee's resources and training could recover from his high ankle sprain compared to Rick's.
Yeah, I was going to say my recovery would resemble 19th century medicinal methods. It would take very, very long time. It would be miserable. And you could have a Brew McCoy back, somewhat mobile pretty quickly. So it would be an embarrassing race. My body's broken down.
Well,
friend of the podcast.
Yeah,
friend
go
of
ahead,
the
Ryan.
podcast, Chase Thomas, also. Jack, I don't know if you remember what exactly it was. I think he broke his foot during the 2022 football season. And he was full I'm not going to be able to go to games. But then he was there in the stands, not the press box for the Florida game. 2 weeks after it happened, or a week after surgery. I think just crutches, but maybe a scooter. And that was always a very hilarious image. So
even the crutches worried me. I've never had I don't know about you guys. I've never had crutches. I've never had I almost said a cane. We're all under 30. I don't think any of us is using a cane. I've never had any, kind of walking assistance device. I was very nervous about the potential of having crutches, but again, dodged a bullet there.
Well, I think we can all agree, Rick, that the moment you set foot in the Tommy Elam press box Saturday night for the Kent State game, everyone's going to be calling you a warrior, period. Tony Vitello approved.
Yeah. You don't want to know my batting average, but I'm a warrior.
Yeah, that doesn't matter anymore. Yeah.
No.
When you walk around, people are going to know that you are there. There's that guy right there, Brick Butler.
There's that guy. He's a Patriot.
All right,
let's
move on to the football talk here. As I mentioned at the top of the show, 51-10 win for Tennessee football over NC State. I think we all three were very confident in the Vols' chances against the Wolfpack in Charlotte, all picking, multiple score wins for Tennessee. But no, I don't think any of us saw a 41-point win coming, and I don't think really anybody did. And that just shows how, far above Tennessee was over NC State and just how much more of a dominant team they are, specifically defensively. My goodness, just a complete rout of that NC State offense for the Tennessee defense. Got to be the best defensive performance of the Josh Heupel era, or at least up there. I think of Kentucky 22. Some other games are up there, certainly, but this defensive performance is the headline for me, Ryan, when thinking back about this game.
Yeah, no doubt. It just completely dominant. And NC State, after they had 3 first downs on the first drive of the game. They end the game with 10 first downs, don't cross midfield in the second half. Just, pretty staggering. And I think we definitely knew. We talked about it last week, and I wrote about it, how I just couldn't get myself to seeing NC State winning the game because I just thought Tennessee was going to be so much better on the defensive line than NC State was on the offensive line. But even going in with that notion, Tennessee's defense line was more dominant than I expected. Just NC State had no prayer to not even just run the ball successfully. They couldn't even run the ball to try to just stick to the run and stay ahead of the sticks because just so many of those runs were negative. Rush has 13 tackles on the loss for the day for Tennessee. I think 3 sacks, so 10 of them on true run plays. So I think that was, the most jarring aspect of it. The numbers are all pretty staggering. 39 rushing yards on 28 carries, 143 total yards of offense. Like I said, didn't cross midfield in the second half. But I think the other thing too, we talked about it a lot on our podcast after the game, but just getting to the next day and actually seeing the numbers, Tennessee, 12 personnel, 2 tight end sets, 46% of the time, I think was the final number. That was, even more than maybe it felt like at the time, and certainly a wrinkle that we haven't seen much. And I'm very skeptical that we're going to see it that much moving forward, but something that Tennessee's been pretty adamant about that they are going to do a lot more this year, and that wasn't just a one-game thing.
Rick, what's something you keep thinking about when you go back to this game and really process it now, 5 days later? What's something you keep coming back to with this dominant performance from Tennessee?
Yeah, for me, it's actually an easy answer, and I'll give Ryan a little bit of credit for this as he was saying it during the game and then certainly on some of our post-game stuff after the game. But man, Josh Heupel he put NC State in a blender with his play calling throughout the game. I was really impressed, and I've gone back and I've watched a little bit of the game so far this week as sort of just preparing for the next week or what's to come. And it is such a big takeaway. It's just how much Josh Heupel was able to out-scheme NC State, how much he was able to keep them on their heels, how often there were plays in the first quarter that set up something later in the third quarter. There was one play in particular that really impressed me where Squirrel White just runs a kind of a screen pass to the flats on the left side of the field. Okay, he gets it. He moves it upfield a little bit. They come back to that game a little bit later. Again, Squirrel White kind of runs out to the flat. Ethan Davis running with him as if he's going to go be his lead blocker. All of a sudden, Ethan Davis just cuts back 180 to the middle of the field. He gets the quick dump-off pass. There's a series of blockers ready for him, and now they're going the other way down the field. That was a picture-perfect play of, hey, you set it up one way, they think it's coming back, you flip it to the other side of the field, and you find your advantage there. So there were so many examples of Josh Heupel just putting NC State in a blender. He broke their brains a couple times. That Miles Kitselman touchdown where he's 15 yards without anybody even in the same zip code, that's one of those ones you go back to and you say, wow, that's a guy who knows what he's doing, who's got also the pieces to get him there. I think some of those things, and you can definitely tell from last year, some of those things weren't always able to be run because of just the ability to execute certain things across the field. So I think that what I've really what I've really been coming back to this week is that not only does Tennessee have the players to run just all sorts of different types of things between all four quarters of the game, but they have a coach and a coaching staff that knows how to put them in an effective position too.
I'll answer my own question here. I mentioned before the season multiple times that I was worried that Tennessee wasn't going to have that dude at wide receiver who could help Nico really maximize his potential, that everybody was just going to kind of be about the same and there wasn't going to be anyone that stuck out. And I also mentioned I didn't know if Tennessee's offense had a guy who could fill Jalen Wright's shoes as a game-breaking, snap of the fingers, can flip the game on its head type of guy. My attitude toward both of those has changed. I don't know if Tennessee has an absolute dude who will separate himself at the receiver core, but the depth of the receiver core, everyone being solid and tight end being 3 deep is really encouraging so far. And Nico being, just dispersing it beautifully so far through 2 weeks. But the second part of that, and it's the biggest part, is how good Dylan Sampson has been. He is the ultimate playmaker for this Tennessee offense. He allows, the passing game to be as efficient as it's been. He has that flip the game on its head type of capability with his play. He's such a complete back now at this point, much more complete back than he was a year ago. I think the most complete back in the past couple of years for Tennessee, including Jalen Wright. So Dylan Sampson, what he's shown in the first 2 weeks is the most encouraging thing for me of this Tennessee offense.
Yeah, I agree. And it's not that my concern wasn't necessarily like, can he be a type of a game breaking back like Jalen Wright who could one play, just make something big happen. To me, it was more about, could he be a consistent 3 down, run between the tackles, just like you said, a complete back. Because we knew we had the pass catching element. We knew that in space he was extremely, extremely effective. And for 2 weeks, 32 carries, I can think of one run where it was like, all right, that was a bad read by him. He missed a hole. And it was right, I guess on Tennessee's first touchdown drive, right before they threw the 3rd and long shovel pass for him, which he made a really nice play in space to get those last 5 yards and move the sticks. So just the consistency there. He's definitely bigger physically. The way he's been really, really effectively running between the tackles. And it's clear. I mean, I think we knew that it was clear that he was going to be like a true number one. It wasn't going to be 33, 33, 33 split like it was last year. And we'll see more what it looks like when Cam Seldon, who missed this game, gets back too.
Right.
But, he got 20 carries. Deshaun Bishop got 10. So 67% there. And if the game was more competitive, I imagine Dylan Sampson might have even gotten more of a workload in the fourth quarter. So he looks fantastic. He looks like one of the best backs in the SEC, and a guy that I think I had him, if I'm not mistaken, when I did my article on like 5 guys that could end up on the all SEC teams that weren't on it in the preseason for Tennessee. He was a guy I had on there, and he's a guy I'd be really surprised if he's not on there just from watching him through 2 games.
Hey, one other thing on Dylan Sampson too, and you guys just mentioned a lot of the good stuff right there with the stats and the on-field production. One thing that I noticed just from my vantage point on the sideline or in the press box, I don't know if anybody's having more fun out there than Dylan Sampson. I think that's important for a guy like him, just with the swagger that he plays with the confidence that he plays with the energy that he plays with. I think when you see him dancing on the field before the game, I think when you see him in some of these videos dancing with Josh Heupel after the game, he's the kind of guy that I think is probably one of those big energy bringers inside the locker room. So if Dylan Sampson is having fun, I'd imagine that your whole team is having pretty fun. And he's the kind of guy in my mind who can really, build something off of just having a good attitude, having good energy, having a lot of confidence and swagger leading into any given game.
That's a good point, Rick. And it kind of, is a good, kind of 1B to Nico too, as being a leader on this offense, because Nico maybe isn't the ultimate energizer bunny. If that's not maybe his leadership style. He's actually very mature and very calm, cool, collected, and it reflects in his play on the field too. And I think that's great to have at quarterback. But you're right, Dylan Sampson being the energy guy is key to have on an offense. One more thing about really the running back room, not so much about Dylan Sampson, but in Cole Kubelik's Sunday SEC takeaways, which he does every week, which is a great thread to read. He shouted out Deshaun Bishop for pass blocking. And that is probably the one part of Dylan Sampson's game that he can really improve on, becoming a more well-rounded player. But Deshaun Bishop being a good pass blocker so far this season just makes that room all the more impactful and all the more important for Tennessee.
For sure. And it just allows them to trust him in more spots. And that's obviously such an important part because, like we've talked about many times, Tennessee is not sending substitutes on the field for third down, for specific third down packages and stuff like that. So you just there's just a level of having to do multiple things, of not having to be a complete back to play in Tennessee's system, because there's just not going to be a ton of packages for you. They're not going to sub you in on 3rd and 1 to go heavy, and they're not going to sub you in on 3rd and 11 or sub you out on 3rd and 10 if you can't pass block. There's just an element of needing to be able to do everything, and he's solid. I mean, the Jabari Small feel is just continually what I get from him. I don't think and obviously he can get better and maybe turns into this. I don't see him being a absolute stud, an all SEC guy, a game-changing guy, but just a really, really solid running back who's going to get the yards that are there every single time. And you just don't have to worry about a great type of guy to have on the team.
Hey, I'd imagine that you're going to see a lot of Deshaun Bishop once again in this week's game against Kent State. I know we're going to be talking about it a little bit later on, but I figured, hey, we're already talking about the guy with Cam Seldon being out last week. Josh Heupel did give a bit of optimism towards his return this week. But again, it's Kent State. You really factor that in when you're thinking about this game. So I'd expect to see a lot of Deshaun Bishop getting some of that rotation, continuing to see what he can do in the pass block situations and so on and so forth. But opponent calls for it.
120-13. That is how much Tennessee is outscoring their opponents so far this season. Tennessee hasn't allowed an offensive touchdown. Rick, when you look at these 2 weeks, how has your long-term view of this Tennessee football team in 2024 changed, if at all?
Yeah, it has changed. I think I've kind of, I'll say this. Going into the North Carolina State game, or I guess coming out of it, I admitted that I was wrong about the game. I thought that it was going to be much more of a high-scoring contest. I didn't think that the Wolfpack was going to be able to stay up and keep scoring with Tennessee, but I thought they'd certainly be able to put up points in their own right. The simple fact of the matter was that they weren't. And that was something that was surprising to me. And I'm not necessarily just taking that as a one-game situation, as that North Carolina State came out super flat that game and it told more about them and less about Tennessee's defense. No, I think that Tennessee's defense is proving itself to be legit. We all know that any defensive unit can get bolstered by that front line, and Tennessee's got one of the best front lines in the game. We said that going into the season. We believed it going into the season. But now we've all got eyes on it for the last 8 quarters. We can see it with our own 2 eyes, just how good and just how disruptive they've been. Oh, wait, and that's without their top player really even collecting a lot of those stats. He's done a lot for this team already, but he hasn't necessarily gotten those stats yet. So I think there's still more to be done from this Tennessee defense. But I figured they would be better. I think we all kind of knew what the defensive line would be, that there were certainly question marks within the secondary. The defensive unit was somewhere I was a little bit shaky on going into the year. I've definitely solidified on that. So if you're solidifying on the defense, how can you not say, that your overall opinion of the team is rising up? I think that Tennessee does have a better chance in Norman than I probably gave them a couple weeks ago in the preseason. So that's a kind of an indication of just, I think that if this defense is actually legit, if they can be a 12-game regular season defense and really sort of impose their will across the year, Yeah, I think that some of those games absolutely play into more of Tennessee's favors than I originally thought. So I am more bullish on Tennessee just because, man, it's a shutdown defense. I know that they really haven't gone up against any SEC competition. We're waiting to see what that looks like. But, man, you can only grade about what you've seen, and what we've seen is pretty much decimation.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. And, if this front is just that otherworldly dominant, I mean, NC State is still a proud program. It's not like they're just a complete nobody slouch. Like, they're going to find a way to win 7-8 games this year, I'd imagine, especially with the ACC being as bad as they are. But with this front just being this crazy good, the secondary isn't going to have to be really tested all that much this season at all. Like, maybe just a couple of times when you get to the big SEC opponents. So, yeah, the secondary, you could argue, still a tad bit of a question mark, but with this front being that good, I don't know how much it's going to matter in the end.
Well, and going off that as well, Reese Davis was talking on the College Game Day podcast. I believe that was on Tuesday, if today is Thursday. Excuse me. He said that he talked to Tim Banks before Tennessee's game against NC State. He said, hey, just how are you feeling about this this defense as a whole, especially with the secondary, considering you do have a couple new pieces in that. Sounds like Tim Banks kind of looked at him and said, you know what? We believe in our defense, but we really believe that in that defensive line. The best way to kind of give a little bit of help to the guys on the back end is to not give the quarterback that much time to throw it or move the ball down the field. So I think there is an expectation, maybe not an expectation, just I think there is an understanding too of that's where Tennessee's strength is. That's what they're going to try to take advantage of, and that's where they can find their most, the ways to benefit this team the most.
Ryan, I'll ask you the same question as a fellow 10-2er before the season. How has your long-term view of the Vols changed after 2 weeks, if at all?
Yeah, I'm definitely more positive, but not like a ton more positive. Because I thought this was a defensive line was going to be one of the best in the country, and they've completely solidified it. So I think just when the expectation is that high, like even it just being solidified is like a big thing. Because that was a huge part. I mean, that was my whole thing is that I think Tennessee's quarterback play is going to be really good. I think they're going to be elite on the defensive line if they can stay healthy, real solid on the offensive line. And it's like, all right, you can have questions at other spots. If you're really good at those three spots, you're going to have a really good team. And I think specifically with the defensive line, one of the big things I asked was, all right, does anybody else take the next step? We know they have a ton of depth. We know James Pierce is a game breaker. Does anyone else take the next step? Tyree West, to me, seems like he's taking the next step. Omar Norman Lott feels like he's taking the next step. And Josh Josephs, while he hasn't been a game wrecker, is clearly you see the offseason improvement that they talked a lot about and why he was a big name during fall camp. So that's a big part of it. And I will say, Tennessee's pass rush was really good in the NC State game. And maybe y'all have a different feel on this than me, but it didn't feel to me like the South Carolina game last year or the A&M game last year or the Iowa game last year where it was like they just don't have any time to throw. Like the pass defense, the secondary is not being tested at all. Tennessee got pressure, but it wasn't like it was snap. James Pierce runs right past the offensive tackle a ton.
I was almost just more impressed by the interior guys in the run defense.
Yeah. I mean, no, 100%.
13 tackles.
And I think with that, because the pass rush was good. I don't mean to indicate that it wasn't. That made me feel better about secondary. Just because I feel like most games, Tennessee's defensive line is going to be able to get pass rush similar to what he did in that game. It wasn't like it was just unbelievable, no time for Grayson McCall to throw ever. So while kind of like you said, Jack, there's probably going to be some games Tennessee plays where those issues in the secondary or question marks are going to be exploited. I just don't think we're going to see that a ton.
Exactly.
So to me, that's less of a concern. Offense, I still feel good about. The big time great receiver is still to me kind of the question mark, and how good can the passing game be? But I feel better, and I think more than anything, I feel worse about some of Tennessee's opponents, especially Oklahoma. I'm sure we'll talk a ton about that next week. But I just feel a lot better about that game. It's not that I feel radically different about the Alabama game. I already picked Tennessee to win that game. But it's not like Alabama's just hit the ground running and it's been like, oh, wow, they're way, way better than I expected. I really underestimated them.
Well, you look down the schedule, we're talking about this defensive line and secondary, dynamic here. I think you have to be a dang good quarterback to attack this Tennessee defense. And outside of Carson Beck, I'm not sure if anyone's going to be able to. Like, we saw Alabama's O-line struggle against South Florida, and Jalen Milrose, he's not the most consistent guy in the world. Jackson Arnold got sacked 3 times by Houston last Saturday. Their offensive line didn't look great. He's also not been very efficient to start the season. So, I mean, outside of Carson Beck, I don't know if there's just a guy who, Tennessee fans should look at and be like, oh, I'm scared of that guy. It's really just Carson Beck, in my opinion, at this point.
Yeah, I agree. And it kind of pairs with the offensive line play, too, where Georgia has a really good offensive line play to back it up. But, I think the Oklahoma game, I just can't help but feel kind of like I felt about going into the NC State game, where it's just like the offensive line for Oklahoma was already question mark coming to the end of the year. They're banged up. Maybe they get a bunch of guys back before, in the next 10 days before Tennessee plays them. But I just feel like they're not going to be able to score a ton on Tennessee. And now Oklahoma's defense is, I think, a good bit better than NC State's, and it's not going to be easy for Tennessee's offense to score in that game. But it's hard for me not to feel good about it. Alabama has kind of been what I expected, and nothing's really changed about how I view that game. Arkansas is the one game I do feel like looks harder to me right now, but it's still a game I think Tennessee's going to be able to score nearly 50 in, and I just have, we watched it this past weekend. Arkansas is not prone to actually win football games that they're in right now. They have that find a way to lose thing that Tennessee had for a long time. So, and not that I thought Kentucky was a loss before the year or anything, or even was a game I was worried about for Tennessee, but not sure Kentucky crosses midfield multiple times in that game.
I mean, we're talking about a Kentucky team that was just awful against South Carolina. That game's in Neyland. Mississippi State just lost to Arizona State. That game's in Neyland. So I don't think there's any threat of upsets there. Of course, Vandy, no way. But yeah, these games after Kent State, the next 4 games are, the ones that feel like you could make them into intriguing storylines. Of course, Oklahoma and Alabama for sure. But you're right. Arkansas did look good against Oklahoma State. They shot themselves in the foot multiple times. I don't know if that offense is going to look like a well-oiled machine against the Tennessee defense, though. I'm still taking Tennessee big in that game. And then Florida, who knows how they'll play in that game, but you can't say you've really been encouraged by what you've seen out of the Gators so far this season. You mentioned you didn't feel differently about the Alabama game. I thought that was a bit curious just because, they pulled away in the fourth quarter against South Florida, but there's still issues that, are persisting for Alabama from last year. To me, the game feels more gettable at this point. Rick, do you agree? Has your stance on the Alabama game changed at all after seeing them struggle against Alex Golish's South Florida team in Tuscaloosa?
Yeah, it did a bit, and I think it might have been less to do with South Florida. Certainly, they had their struggles, and I've not gone back to fully dive into that game yet. But one of the things that I've been impressed by with Tennessee, and specifically going to Alabama, you saw that they needed it in 22. You saw that they didn't have it in 23. That was just a 4-quarter performance, a team that can go in and play the whole way through a game from the first quarter to the second quarter and so on and so forth. Last year, we saw a team that, came out firing out of the gates. They put up a couple good drives. I believe they had the lead a good bit at halftime, but then they really came out and they couldn't play that third and fourth quarter. You saw in the 22 game how Tennessee needed, drives in the fourth quarter, drives with less than 60 seconds left in the game to be able to score. So I think that Tennessee has the pieces to make this game competitive against Alabama. I think that they have the pieces to win this game against Alabama, but we know that it's going to take a 4-quarter game. You can also look back to South Florida's game and say that, hey, they played 3 good ones, but then Alabama was able to come out for that last final 15 minutes, show off the conditioning and strength that they had, and be able to take that game under control. So I think just the simple fact that I'm more of a believer that Tennessee has the dogs to play 4 quarters, play strong those 4 quarters. I think that gives Tennessee as good of a chance as anything.
And of course, being at home helps. I want to see Alabama this weekend in Madison. I know Bama is a much better team, should win maybe big, but just seeing them go on the road, first true road game in the Kalen DeBoer, just see how they play.
They'll win easier this week than they did last week. That's my thought.
Probably, just because it's like, get right, no funny business.
And that's my thing. I mean, that's my thing. I had questions about Alabama coming here. I'm not a Jalen Milroe believer. So, yeah, Jalen Milroe goes out there and doesn't play great. They have a bunch of offensive linemen out, or 2 offensive linemen out, and the offensive line doesn't play great. That was an issue for him last year, too. I think it's maybe that I just wasn't as high on Alabama as others. I mean, again, I picked Tennessee to win that game before the year, so I wasn't shocked to see them struggle the way they did. Obviously, it was surprising, but it wasn't just unheard of. And a lot of the issues where I thought, I don't think Alabama's going to be very great in this regard. They weren't very great in that game, so it just wasn't shocking to me necessarily.
Rick, simple question. After 2 weeks, Tennessee football national championship contender?
That's tough. Well, the new 12-team playoff is throwing me off for this question. Like, do I think
No, that has
doesn't
nothing
matter?
to
That
do
doesn't
with
matter.
it. That doesn't
There's
matter at
certain-
all.
that doesn't?
There's
Do they
gonna be
have
other
the
teams
ability?
that make-
Do they have the ability to win 4 games and then win the national championship? I think that's going to be. I think that's a tough challenge for this team. But could they play in a national championship environment and win? I do think that. What do you mean?
Well, then, yeah, if you can beat Georgia or Ohio State on a neutral site, then how do you care about playing Penn State at home? Like, are you kidding me?
But there's a series that you got to get through. You got to get through one, game 13,
saying you
14,
don't know-
15, 16.
You're saying
I'm saying it's still
undecided.
early. I'm saying it's still early for me to decide at least if they can, go out there and win the national championship. There's a lot of things, but they're in a lot better category than I would have put them, a couple weeks ago. So
Yeah, my thing is the playoff aspect doesn't change it. If anything, it makes me think that they can do it more. Because beforehand, they would have only been able to lose to Georgia, and they'd have to beat everybody else. And whereas I think outside of Georgia and Ohio State and Texas, I'm not sure there's anybody else that I would say I think is definitively better than Tennessee right now.
okay, I see what you're saying, but I guess what I'm trying to say there is that in order to pick Tennessee winning 3 games or 4 game stretch?
4 games if you don't win the SEC.
Okay. So a 3 to 4 games. In order for me to decide that Tennessee is going to win a 3 to 4 game stretch of the best teams in the nation, I want to see a little bit more than Chattanooga and North Carolina State. I'm extremely optimistic that they have better chances.
Yeah.
But, I don't know. Can they, can Tennessee put together, consecutive games against, good teams and see how that does? See how they do against Florida and Alabama. So, I got a question if, see how anybody can win 4 straight games in a row at the end of the year. But I think they got a pretty good shot, at least better than they did earlier in the season, or better than they did before the season in my mind.
Let me put it this way. I think there's only 7 national championship contenders, and Tennessee is one of them. I think there's 5 from the SEC, and it's Georgia, Texas, Tennessee, Ole Miss, and Alabama. I think all 5 of those are national championship contenders at this point. And I'll throw in Ohio State and Miami. But that's it. Like, you look at the rest of college football and how teams have struggled through the first 2 weeks. Oregon looking shaky. Penn State barely getting past Bowling Green. There's been so many almost upsets. Bama struggling with South Florida. I know I said they're a natty contender, but still. Tennessee rolling NC State. That's the stuff Nick Saban Alabama teams do. That's the stuff Kirby Smart Georgia teams do. It's different this time around. They're not flimsy on defense. It's completely different. I never really bought into Tennessee truly being able to win the national championship in 22, and then their defense got exposed. As good as Hendon and Hyatt were, it feels different this year. Yes, it's 2 weeks, but a dismantling of a solid program on a neutral site is enough for me to say that Tennessee is a surefire national championship contender because of how complete they are, because of how comfortable Nico looks. People will say 2 picks. Of course, one wasn't his fault, and yeah, he made 1 bad throw, but he's looked pretty dang good so far, I'd say, and really efficient, can run the Heupel offense really well. So, Ryan, that's where I'm at right now. Am I too high? Well, do I need to check here?
No, I think that's fair. I would throw Oregon in the national title still as a contender. I know they've looked bad the first 2 weeks. I just still think they have enough talent that I'm not selling completely on them being.
So you throw Oregon in, but not Penn State.
Yeah, I don't.
See, that's interesting to me.
I don't believe in James Franklin. I don't believe in Penn State. I don't. Sue me.
Okay.
I
get it. I don't think either are.
I'll believe Penn State, and I know this is a completely wrong thought process because you could say the exact same thing about Tennessee. But I'll believe Penn State's a national title contender when I see them win a big game.
Well, they
haven't
went
done
on
it in
the
8
road.
years.
Morgantown, week 1, smashed them. Oregon barely beat Idaho.
Yeah, but
And
Oregon
Boise State in Eugene.
Oregon has a coach I trust and a program I respect, and we're talking. They have let me tell you something right now. Penn State hasn't won a big game since the Obama administration. Sorry, sue me.
No, he's right.
I don't think there's correlation. I don't think that.
What has Dan Lanning done at Oregon? He lost to Kalen DeBoer twice last year. Those were his only games. What has Oregon done?
I mean, there is some truth in that, but I still think I believe in what Oregon has in the trenches more. I believe in their talent. Again, they've looked really bad for 2 weeks, but I'm just saying I'll give them some time to see if they can figure it out.
We should make a friendly bet. You spot me 10 points in the Civil War this weekend. I'll take the Beavs.
What's the spread of it?
Like 24, just
20?
way too high. In Corvallis, they're going to struggle again. They might lose. If they lose, I'm coming for you Saturday night. You better believe. They literally could.
I got a lot riding on it now. But to your actual question, no, I mean, I think it's fair. And look, I'm always a wait and see guy, and I do think there's truth to what Rick said, that Tennessee still has to continue to prove it. I think the passing game, you want to see more from it, but I just go back to what I said before the season when I said I thought they'd go 10-2. I think Nico's going to be really good. I feel at least moderately better about him than I did going into the season. I feel a good bit better about the offensive line, barring it stays healthy. And I feel like Tennessee's defensive line is one of the 2 or 3 best in the country. And I think if you have one of the 5 best units in the country at those 3 positions, you're going to be in the national championship hunt. And I feel confident Tennessee's defensive line is. I think Nico is at least right in that ballpark. And I think, the offensive line is probably not top 5, but at least top 10.
To Jack's point, I think it's legitimately fair that when you look at something like the FPI rankings, Tennessee is one of the, 8 or so legitimate teams with a national football, national championship appearance percentage or odds or chances or whatever it is. So to Jack's point, I think that Tennessee is in that radar, but there's just some more things that have to shake out. But I think they're in that category after you kind of explain that.
Yeah. I think everyone will be on board after the Oklahoma game, because if Tennessee wins by 2 touchdowns to Norman, I think it's just, there's no doubt at that point. Brian, you were 10-2. If you could change your preseason record prediction, would you change it to 11-1?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about this last night. That's funny. I think I would still stick. I'd still stick 10-2. But it's one of those things that really went back and forth on this. If you ask me right now, every single game, I think Tennessee's only, pick every single game, I think Tennessee's only going to lose the 1. But I think when you start talking about the odds and the likelihood, I'd say they probably still lose the second one. I don't know. I'm on the fence about it. I'll say 10-2 for right now still.
There's just no late season gotcha game. There's not one. I mean, It's Oklahoma or Arkansas, Alabama. It's right coming up. And they're firing on all cylinders right now. It's hard for me to see them dropping one they shouldn't.
I'm saying?
Come off a bygone to Fayetteville, right? I'm not.
There he goes.
About that. So
yeah, no, you're talking me into it, Jack, because you're right. It's what we said from the beginning when you talk about Tennessee's schedule, where the top in the SEC is really good. They have to play a very good top. Now it's not looking as hard because Oklahoma's not as good as we thought they might be. And the bottom's just so easy, and it looks, I don't know, just as easy, maybe easier because of how bad Kentucky is. I guess Vanderbilt's probably not the 16th best team in the conference like we thought they were, but they're still not a game you're worried about a ton.
Rick, you were 9-3. Would you change to 10-2 or even 11-1 if you could?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel a lot better about Tennessee's chances at Oklahoma coming up in what is it, just about 8, 9, 10 days or so. And then we talk about this Alabama game. And that was actually the one when we had done our original season predictions. That was actually more of the one that was a toss-up to me. I really felt like going to Oklahoma. They do have that great defense, but I thought their offense was going to be a lot better than it should be, than it's shown to be so far. So, yeah, I think that the Oklahoma game is so much more within grasp still because, yes, despite it's on the road and despite the fact that it's going to be an extremely challenging environment and everything with Josh Heupel and the fans and all that is still true, I think that Tennessee can outlast Oklahoma in that game. I think that, yeah, both defenses are going to have a couple big opportunities to make plays, but I think that Tennessee can outlast the Oklahoma offense and be able to put some more points up on the board by the time the game is over. In that Alabama game, if Tennessee is rolling, if Tennessee beats Oklahoma, if they beat Florida the weekend before, if they can go to Arkansas before that Florida game, if you have all the momentum in the world going into a home game against Alabama in Neyland Stadium, if you're under the lights in some capacity, whether it's the 3:30 that just goes late or it's a 7 or 8 p.m. kickoff, yeah, I think that is going to be a very tough Tennessee team to stop, especially in that environment. So I am moving my prediction up. 10-2, I think is, to me, more likely. And a lot of it, I thought Ryan made great points with just that, hey, it's kind of actually easy to see that Georgia's maybe the big team left, that one definitive loss, but you also just don't know with college football. So maybe it's a little bit safer to go ahead and add in that second loss. But yeah, I'm definitely taking it up from 9-3. That was already a little bit cautious in its own right. And I've been impressed by what Tennessee's been able to do in these first 2 weeks.
One last guy I do want to shout out, I think's played really well this year, or played really well last week, wasn't tested much week 1, it's just Jermon McCoy. He was the guy that I felt really good about. Yeah, I really liked that get when Tennessee got him from Oregon State. Fortunately for me and what we have going on Saturday, Dylan Gabriel's not going to have to face him in the Civil War matchup. But he looked really good. And I think what especially was impressive to me was just the physicality that he came up with and tackled on a number of occasions in that game. So he looks really good. Ricky Gibson looks solid. I continue to feel pretty good about the corners and the star spot and a little bit the safeties. Still, to me, the big question marks in that back end.
Hey, real quick, if we're mentioning guys who made some really nice tackles, made a really good, impressive performance, Amari Thomas is one of the guys that really stood out to me from watching that game. He was everywhere, and I think you really just give so much credit to, and I don't know their names off the top of my head exactly, but Rodney Garner and his cast of characters that coach that defensive line unit. Coach Chop, that's right. That's exactly it. They do such an unbelievable job. Robert Ayers, absolutely, the former Vol. I think that they do such an unbelievable job, not just with scheme and technique, and those things are above my head. I'm a 150-pound sports writer. I never got close to the defensive line back in my 1 year of playing days back in 8th grade. That being said, though, I can tell hustle and I can see effort, and those guys play with some of the most hustle and effort on the entire team. There's times where, you've got a big defensive tackle like Amari Thomas and the play gets behind him, right? The running back gets to the side or something like that. A lot of defensive tackles, a lot of nose tackles in today's day and age, they might give up on the play. Say, hey, that's the linebacker's guy now. He's going to be closer. He can go make that play. Amari Thomas is a guy who chases down every single play that you watch him on the field. He's really impressive. He's one of those guys that just feels like such a tone setter. Ryan, we talked about last week how Keenan Peely, kind of the enforcer of the Tennessee defense. I'd like to think that Amari Thomas is certainly a tone setter of the Tennessee defense as well.
Yeah, that's a good point.
For sure. He's played really at a really high level, and he's one. Him and Bryce Neeson are those two guys that you just kind of know what you're going to get from them. And it's been continued to be really steady.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mentioned it earlier. The interior being above average and exceeding expectations only makes the line better. Eason and Thomas looking great so far. But Brian mentioned Omar Norman-Lott is one of the most improved players. And you talk about, how about that Jacoby Thomas DB blitz? These guys can get after it. So the defense is just a well-oiled machine right now. I love the Jermon McCoy shout-out. Thought he's played really well as well. But semi-bold prediction, by the way, going back to the Alabama game, it'll be the same AP poll ranking for the teams this year as it was in 22, just swapped. So Tennessee will be 3rd and Bama will be 6th. That was the
thing. Yeah, that was it.
Yeah.
You think Bama drops a game to Georgia and Tennessee's undefeated?
Right. It probably requires Ohio State to lose to Oregon, which would be contradicting myself. But I think even if Ohio State barely wins and looks kind of bad, that Tennessee will be able to leap them as long as Tennessee batters Oklahoma and Norman. And see, that impressive of a win will resonate and be remembered. So 3-6 Tennessee, Alabama.
Is the Texas Georgia game the next week?
Texas Georgia is
it the same week, right?
It's mid to late October.
It's the same week, Brian, as Tennessee.
I believe it's the 19th of October.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say, where if that game had been like the week before, they maybe would have had the chance to jump one of those teams. But
yeah,
that's going to be great. I know that October 12th, for good reason, gets all the hype as the big Saturday in college football. But, I mean, there's talk about what looks like 2 just incredible matchups on the 19th with, 4
SEC.
no doubt top 10 teams. Yeah.
Yep.
4, like you said, 4 to 5 best in the SEC.
I believe my lovely fiance will be in Austin for that Georgia-Texas game. That would be a bucket list game to go to. If you were looking at all the games this year, just the big matchup ones, that would be. I mean, it's got to be one of the highest on the list. If you're not a big, Ohio State, Michigan, that might be your number one.
Probably 1B to Oregon at Oregon State this weekend. Yeah, I'd say so.
Oh, of course.
Right behind it.
Especially with the rampant gambling addictions that game has been pulling out.
Hey, Corvallis, one of the hardest places to play college football. Don't knock it. Bring your chainsaw. All right, Tennessee hosting Kent State Saturday night, 7:45. An absurdly late kick. Feel bad for you guys. The Flashes are coming to town. They've looked really bad. Not a good football team. Arguably the worst in the FBS. They lost to St. Francis last week. Been a rough go of it for Kent State, and I imagine it will be the same on Saturday for that Kent State football team. The one burning question that everyone's asking about this game, Ryan, at the top of all the articles, it's the headline: will Tennessee score 70 points for the first time in the Josh Heupel era? Will it happen Saturday night?
Would that be a
I'm going to
school
say
record?
no.
No?
Maybe, I'm not sure. I'm going to say no just because I think they're going to play the starters so little. I don't think Nico makes it to halftime in this game. I'm not sure Dylan Sampson gets more than a drive or two. I still think Tennessee scores a ton, maybe in the 60s, but not much.
Definitely in the 60s. Rick?
I believe Tennessee's record at home is 70 points, and that came against Louisiana Monroe in 2000. Now, they did put 101 points up in a game twice in 1915, so almost 110 years ago.
Who wins?
But I think that's 70.
Who wins, 1915 Tennessee Vols or versus 2024 Tennessee Vols?
That 1915 team was nasty from what I believe I've heard.
Yeah. Bryson Easton has said this week that he would not have played football before they had the face mask. So there's one play. If you got to play by 1915 rules, there's at least one key Tennessee player who's not playing in the game.
He said, "I'm out."
You might be playing plumbers and plumbers, but you got to play by the plumbers rules. If you're talking about 1915 action, no face mask at all. I'll tell you what, I think that Tennessee is going to put up an ungodly amount of points. I don't know if it'll be 70. I don't know if they'll break their record. But I think, like Brian said, this is another tune-up game, getting ready for Oklahoma down the road. I'll tell you what, guys, and there's plenty of places you can look at for this game. I'm not going to be looking at a few places besides wide receiver. There's a couple of really big wide receiver things that I want to look at in this game. Number one, you didn't really need the wide receivers much last week. I've seen a couple people this week, and they've been talking about how maybe they were a little bit disappointed from the receivers last week against the Wolfpack. Ryan said it during the game. Tennessee didn't need their receivers that much against the Wolfpack, right? They were running it. They were using their tight ends. There came a point in the game where they didn't need to be throwing the ball and moving it downfield and really moving NC State's defense back down the field. So there just wasn't a lot of need for it, right? They did their job in other ways. That being said, not that Tennessee's going to need their wide receivers for this one as well, but now you're about to start the big SEC stretch. What we talked about after the Chattanooga game, something that I personally said that I really liked, was just that they got their guys the ball a couple of quick times early in the game. They got them comfortable and they got them feeling good. First pass of the game, I believe, went to Chris Brazell. Brew McCoy got involved pretty quickly. Dante Thornton got involved pretty quickly. He had 2 first-quarter touchdowns. So all those guys got their reps. They got the ball early in the game. I think that even though this is a game where those guys are going to be limited, those guys are going to get pulled at some point pretty early on, I'd like to see Tennessee distribute the ball to those guys just so you can continue getting them comfortable in the offense, continue building their confidence as they go. But as we've said, we know that at some point those guys are going to get pulled. You do not need Brew McCoy for 4 quarters to beat Kent State. So what about these next guys that are going to be stepping up? What about these guys that we've heard a lot of throughout fall camp, throughout maybe the last couple of years? How well have they been performing? What does a guy like Caleb Webb do? He's gotten a couple runs here in the last couple of games, but I think he's maybe kind of on that fringe of who's going to be mainly rotating into the games. What about Mike Matthews? What about Braylon Staley, right? Some of these really highly touted freshmen who maybe don't look like they're going to be in that rotational slot. How do they take advantage of a game like this? I know that a lot of people are going to be looking forward towards Oklahoma, forward towards that big SEC game. Maybe they don't necessarily take Kent State as the toughest opponent, but I think for a lot of the guys in this program, this is a game where it's one of their last opportunities to kind of make a mark on the game until one of these other non-conference games comes up. So I'm definitely going to be looking at the wide receivers all game long, again, early on, see if they can get some of these guys comfortable before next week's big showdown, and then later on, see about how some of these younger guys are doing, Mike Matthews, Braylon Staley, see what they can do with the ball in their hands. Maybe a Nathan Leacock, some of those guys. So wide receiver, I feel like I've been looking at a lot of other positions the last couple of weeks. I'm going to try to hone in on wide receiver for this game because I think it's important.
Yeah, and building off that, backup quarterback play for me wasn't the best against Chat. Marklinger didn't play a whole lot. Maybe he plays more this game, and we see a couple of drives out of him and what he looks like. But Gassimore didn't have a great showing against Chat. So what does the backup quarterback play look for Tennessee? Because that instantly can become one of the most important positions on the entire roster if something disastrous happens with Nico, of course. Ryan, is there something you're looking for in this game? I feel like the biggest key is just stay healthy, honestly, in a game like this. But is there something you're intrigued by with this game at all?
Not particularly. I mean, like Rick said, there's just a few names. If Mike Matthews gets some run, I'd like to see what he does. Jalen Smith, they played him a lot of snaps last week.
Sure.
They really just had him completely in the Caleb Perry role, which I thought was interesting.
And I thought he did good.
Yeah, for sure. So him, Idris Farouk made a nice tackle there late in the game. So a couple individual guys,
Jordan
like
Ross,
Gaston Moore. Yeah, Jordan Ross. And I will say the thing with Gaston Moore, that to me becomes, worth watching, because I do think there's an element, and this goes back to our question about Tennessee being national championship contender, being able to make the playoffs. Look, we know if Nico suffers a season-ending injury, none of that's going to happen for Tennessee. But what happens if Nico gets a concussion in the Kentucky game and has to miss some, in the third quarter, Tennessee up 2 touchdowns, and it misses the Mississippi State game the next week? Can Tennessee win 2 games with Gaston Moore against teams that are better than? I think they can, but those are things where it's important that Gaston Moore gets his games reps. And if he's needed to win 2 games to keep Tennessee's season on track while Nico gets healthy, it's not something that just kills Tennessee's season. So I think that's important. A couple fun facts on Kent State of how bad they are. They're averaging through 2 games 1.7 yards per carry. They rank last nationally in scoring percentage in the red zone, second to last nationally on third down conversion rate. Also through 2 games, I think Oklahoma is 4th to worst nationally in third down conversion rate. And then you mentioned it, they lost to St. Francis last week. St. Francis, an FCS team that went 4-6 a season ago, and lost to Dayton in week 1. So Kenny Barnes, I believe, is the head coach's name at Kent State. This is his 2nd season. He is currently against FBS teams 0-12, against FCS teams 1-1. So about as bad as a team, about as bad as a program. This team's going to be worse than Chattanooga. There's no way around it. So
as the
not much to see.
As the great Stan Verrett once said, "Is that bad?"
Yeah.
No,
I don't know who that is.
What was
is that
the guy's
guy
name?
on your wrestling
no,
podcast?
my golly. What?
I don't know who it is
Neil.
either.
No, Neil and Stan. They were the old Sports Center anchors, right? Neil and Stan.
Okay.
One of the guys would go, "Is that bad?" And then the other guy would go, "It's not good."
Not good.
And that was their great catchphrase that has stuck with me for my whole life. Neil and Stan.
Jack and I's youth coming out on this one, as we didn't know that.
Yeah.
Were you guys? I mean, like I was definitely around for it.
Rick.
I'm not that much older than you guys. Do you have memories of Sports Center with the true ticker on the side where it would just go, Angels, Dodgers, Marlins, Rangers, okay. So you do have those memories at least.
Yes. Yeah.
49-point spread. That's what I've been looking up.
Okay.
49. Yeah. I think it opened at 48.
Not enough.
I think that's going to,
I won't disagree.
It's about all I got in this game.
It shouldn't be on the books. Take it off.
Yeah. I don't think Kent State scores more than 3. So,
well, Tennessee
3 feels like the ceiling, unless Gaston Moore throws a pick 6.
Yeah, wouldn't that be something if it's like 3 weeks in and Tennessee's allowed 2 touchdowns, neither offensive?
Yeah.
Well, you go back to last season as well, and I think I think they added in 8 quarters.
Well, Vandy scored.
What did
right?
Vanderbilt do?
They scored a touchdown, didn't they?
I think so.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be honest. I don't remember much of that game.
I don't remember much of that game either.
There's
the most eventful contest. I think
there's
Jack's
an there's an every 2-year tradition that I found since I started covering Tennessee football in 2019, in which the same year Tennessee plays Vanderbilt at home is the same year that Alabama plays Auburn plays at Auburn in the Iron Bowl. And those games almost always are up against each other because it's the primetime game at 3:30 CBS, and then Tennessee Vanderbilt's the worst game of the day, so they put it in the same time slot up against each other. And that Tennessee is always destroying Vanderbilt in the second half, and the Auburn-Alabama game is always significantly closer than one would think because it's always a good game when it's at Auburn. And I end up finding myself watching more of the Auburn or paying closer attention to the Auburn-Alabama game in the fourth quarter than I did the Vanderbilt-Tennessee game. I can't tell you. I remember the big scrum early in the third quarter of the Tennessee-Vanderbilt game last year.
Yeah,
where the
that's
Vanderbilt
right. Yeah.
entire team came on the field to fight. I couldn't tell you a single play that happened in the second half after that, but I
Nico
can
threw a touchdown on
remember.
Colin Castles, right?
I do remember that play. I think I would have told you that was against UConn, though, if you had asked me.
Oh, maybe you're right. Yeah, maybe you're right.
But I do remember sliding down the aisle and standing behind Ben McKee to watch the Gravedigger touchdown for Alabama on his iPad. Because Rick's iPad is always a little bit behind Ben's, and I didn't want it to get spoiled.
Yeah, I don't know why.
And watched it on Ben's iPad.
Hey, this is a Joe Milton legacy game. Let's not knock this Vandy game.
That is true. I do remember that. I do remember Joe Milton crowning himself in the first half after scoring a touchdown.
22 of 33, 383, 4 tutties, no picks. Also 2 rushing. Yeah, this is his 6th touchdown game.
That's a career day.
That is right
for Mr. Milton.
Yep, that is right
for sure.
He went out on top.
I probably crowned myself too after that as well.
Final thing I have for today, just if y'all are wondering, Shane Beamer has said that the bandwagon is getting full, guys. So
I saw that. Yes.
It's too late for y'all to get on the bandwagon.
Dang it.
Sold out.
I mean, it's pretty unbelievable the stakes that he's going to try to hype up a win over Kentucky. Good win for him, but
in which their offense wasn't even that great.
I mean, I went into this.
Oh, they got lucky by facing a Kentucky team that was digging their own grave throughout the game. Like
Kentucky's going to finish like 3-9.
Anybody could have waltzed in there and beat that team.
Yeah, they're awful. They're terrible.
Ryan mentioned Hall's High School last week, and Hall's High School probably could have gone into Lexington and gave them a run for their money.
Yeah. No.
Well, by the way, the Knoxville Hall's High School. Yeah, somebody thought you were talking about
West
Memphis.
Tennessee.
Maybe Memphis, but Jack, where is Hall's High School in West Tennessee? That's your neck of the woods.
I live in the middle of nowhere. You don't even know. Like I'm not close to Memphis, so
yeah. Well, for that one
Jack
guy,
this week,
y'all
night, Brentwood, Henry County, our alma maters.
Where's it at?
I have no idea.
Well,
I just know that they play.
Wow, what's the wager going to be?
It's in Patriot Stadium. You're cooked.
That's a good. We need to figure out where it is. Make some sort of friendly wager on it.
Yeah.
Wow.
You don't just come into Patriot Stadium and win. That's what I've heard. So if it's at Patriot Stadium, I need at least 6.5 points given to me.
Coach Counts does not lose at home. Everyone knows that. All right. Well, we're gonna look that up. We're gonna get out of here. That's enough for today. It's been a fun talking this big picture stuff. Obviously, this Tennessee team is really good this year, and everybody should. What? You figured it out?
It's at Henry County.
Oh,
gotta give me at least 6.5. Gotta give me at least 6.5.
I'm not giving you a touchdown. Are you kidding? You're Brentwood.
It's at Patriot Stadium. It's at Patriot Stadium.
We are in Paris.
It's at Patriot Stadium.
Population of like 8,000.
It's the hardest place to play in the state, is what I've always heard and always said.
That is true, but that doesn't change the fact
the stadium pulse. The stadium pulse is huge.
We are going to run down your throat and win a close defensive battle, grit and grind game. That's why I'm not giving you 6.5, because our style of football is smash mouth. We don't throw it around the yard. Ryan Dameron's in Knoxville now, okay? We're smash mouth football.
It's true.
All right.
We're going to get out of there. We're going to get out of there with a 16-14 win, by God. Better
There's
get
nothing
ready.
like
Brentwood
there's
plays the
nothing-
same way, so
True. There's nothing like an inferior state debating high school football.
Yeah.
yes. Many people have often tried to boast about Tennessee high school football being as good as Texas, Rick. You're right.
Hey,
That's a lot of people are saying that.
we should watch Henry County Brentwood, obviously, on Friday night if we can, and then see if we think the winner of that game would beat Kent State on Saturday night. Game to the All right, that'll wrap
That's
it up.
the perfect amount of disrespect to end it on.
Do what?
Yeah.
So that's the perfect amount of disrespect to end it on.
Exactly. That's what we're all about here. No, I'm just kidding.
We're gonna get
That'll-
clipped.
Yeah, that'll do it for this edition of the RTI Press Pass. Not an interesting weekend upcoming, but certainly next weekend will be very interesting. So we thought to do a big picture talk would be beneficial today. Before Ryan Shumpert, you can find him at rshump00 on X. For Rick Butler, you can find him at Rick Butler on X as well. You can follow me at Jack Foster Media. And of course, follow at Rocky Top Insider for all your Tennessee football coverage needs this season. And on RockyTopInsider.com, be sure and follow along each and every day. But for Ryan and Rick, I'm Jack. We'll see you next time.